Living my bucolic life, we ugly city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello, welcome back. So we are going to start another project today, and it's going to be a comfortable dress, because sometimes you just need a big comfortable dress, and this is going to be it. Yes, it is another simplicity pattern. We'll see how it goes. There's a few different sleeve options. I'm going to be doing these sleeves right here. It looks like they have elastic or something at the bottom. I am not going to be doing the multi-tiered version, but I do want my final length to be, you know, what do they call it? T-length is what we used to call it. You know, long enough that it'll be comfortable, because we're going into fall here. I know it's all over the place, and you never know when you're going to be watching this video. But right now it's still cool enough that I think it'll work. The fabric I'm going to use is a linen, and this is one that I have had in my stash for a while, and I have pre-washed it on hot, pre-dried it on hot, and it's fairly soft, so I think that'll be nice. If it was all one, I'm trying to hold it up to the light here, if it was all light colored, I would probably be lining the skirt and everything, because I don't want to worry about, you know, seeing through and having to wear a slip. But since, you know, it has such a busy dark blue print on it, I'm not going to. So this should be fairly simple. So again, I'm going to be cutting out view A. Now view A does have a contrasting band shown. I'm not doing the contrasting band. So pretty much I am doing view A, but like this, without the band on the outside. Okay, so let me go ahead and open this up, and we're going to get the pattern cut out. Alrighty, so before I cut everything out here, like I said, I'm doing dress A pretty much. So on dress A, I'm doing size 16. If I come down here, it says the finished length, and I'm thankful that they have this on the outside of the envelope for dress A. That's the lower edge. Here it is, finished length, 37 3/4 inches from the base of the neck. So what I'm going to do is get my tape, put a clip at 37 3/4, hold this up to the back of my neck, and see if that's going to fall anywhere close to the length that I want this to be. So that's pretty short. On me, that's just above my back of my knees when I held it up, and I want it longer. So I am going to add, I'm going to say 6 inches if I can. I'm not sure how much fabric I have, but I'm going to add 6 inches. So from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Should be about 44 for a finished length, give or take. So what I'm going to need to do is on my dress A, you can see here on the layout, this piece 7 and piece 8, I'm going to be lengthening those by 6 inches. So I'm just going to put a little mark there so I can keep track of that. It looks like everything else should be good. Let me go ahead and see what the bust measurement on this is. The bust measurement for size 16 is 43. Okay, size 16 is based on a bust measurement of 38. So they are assuming that your bust is this. They're giving you several inches of ease. My bust is not that. My bust is closer to about 41, okay? but in general I fit a 16 better than others. But in order to get enough ease that the pattern is designed for, I may have to do a little bit right here just to give me a little extra. I don't want a huge amount of ease, and you can see on the model, it looks like I just need to be able to pull this over my head, you know? That does look like a pretty darn deep V-neck there. We may end up putting some kind of a little Modesty panel or something. Because see, if here is center, it looks like this is center apex right there. That's putting the V a little lower than I probably would feel comfortable. Because this dress, it looks pretty drapey. I'm wondering if it's the kind where when you lean over, it all like kind of falls forward. And if so, that could be a little tricky. Let me get the pieces cut out and we'll see what we can do to make it all better for me. Okay, so there are a lot of pieces that actually I'm gonna put my hands on and manipulate a little bit. This is the bodice front piece, this piece right here. And here is my situation. Okay, this size 16, which I'm cutting out, has a 43-inch finished bust measurement, which does give me a couple, probably about 2 to 3 inches of ease at least, maybe even more, depending on the bra I wear, you know what I mean? So it's not like it's skin tight, but according to the amount of ease in the pattern, it makes me think that the designers wanted extra ease. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to give myself 1 more inch, which is basically a funky kind of full bust adjustment on this pattern. Now down here, this is going to be straight. As you can see here, that's just straight, but there is the skirt is gathered up to it. So you have a little bit of leeway here with this size, and that's what I'm going to be using. So what I'm doing is this right here is where their bust apex is. You know me, mid-50s and everything like that, time and gravity is kicked in, so my bust apex is actually about 1 inch to 1.5 inches lower than what theirs is. I'm going to put mine at just over 1 inch lower here. So keep that in mind, because that might come into play. Because see, what I wanted to point out is at this point with the bust apex here, the fullest part of the bust here, okay, they have this very low V-neck coming down below it. Okay, if I lower, pretend this is my actual bust, instead of the high point being there, it's actually here, you know, because life. That means that this part where the ruffle is going to be attached onto, it's going to be a lot closer to the bottom of my fullest point of my bust. What I'm going to do to give myself an extra inch or so is I'm getting my pattern piece here and I'm lining up the straight of grain on my grid below, okay? Where my apex is, I am drawing a line straight up along that same straight of grain, okay? The outside edge, that's my size 16. So what I'm going to do now is just cut here along the line I just drew. For some reason, I keep cutting off center, but you know, it's close enough. And I'm cutting up to probably about 1/4 inch of the top there. So let's say I want to give myself an extra inch total. At this point, I want to add 1/2 inch, because 1/2 inch on this side, 1/2 inch on the other side is a full inch, okay? If I want to give myself an extra 1.5 inches, I'm going to spread at this point out 3/4 inch, okay? And I think that's what I'm going to do. So what I need to do is get a scrap of tissue paper, and I'm just going to cut some off of this piece up here. I need to slide this underneath a piece of tape and tape it on here. Get this piece over here positioned the appropriate distance that I feel like I need, okay? And what did I say, about 3/4 inch? No, I think I'm going to do just about 5/8 of an inch. I don't need a whole lot. I just want extra ease, you know, so I have a flowy dress and it doesn't bind. Because the back bodice piece is going to fit me fine. Basically, I have the frame that's somewhere between a 14 and a 16, but I have, you know, chunky sausage arms and a full bust. So, you know, we make things work. But if I was to cut out an entire piece an entire size bigger, it would be too big up here. And, you know, we just don't need that headache in our life. So this is how I'm modifying the front. Because the skirt is going to be gathered and attached here, I don't need to change the skirt because, you know, we'll just gather it slightly looser, but that's not a big problem. So to make these two, oopsie, I'm just going to blend these two pieces together like so, you know, and then I have a new cutting line down here. And so that's going to be my front bodice. My back bodice is staying the same. My front and back facings are staying the same. Now, the final V length might be an issue. And I was trying to think of ways to bring it up, but I can't really do that without changing the shape of this. Because it's like, yes, I could bring it up higher, but then I would have to add a piece down here, or I could bring this up higher and I have to add a piece of there, and that's changing the shape of that V-neck. I don't want to do that. So if anything, I'll just put a little privacy or a modesty panel or a piece of lace or something in there, you know, just because no one wants to see all of that on me. Now for the skirt, for this skirt piece here, I am adding 6 inches. I'm just going to be extending it as I cut it, just with a ruler, marking it with chalk on the fabric itself, and I'll show you that, and that's all good. The last thing is the sleeve, and you know I do have my sausage arms, so I'm looking at their sleeve piece here, and for size 16 they have a 14.5 inch sleeve, which, you know, it's going to give me about an inch or so of ease, but I want it to be a lot fuller than that. You know, I'm getting the effect here that there's a lot of ease there. So again, because the bottom of my sleeve is gathered down here, I have a little bit of freedom to modify this. So I'm just going to line up straight of grain the fullest part of the bicep with the grid underneath, and I'm going to slice it straight up here up to the dot at the very top for my size, okay, which it should be a seam allowance or 5/8 of an inch from the bottom. Okay, now here's the choice to make. If I want to add, let's say I love big sleeves. I don't like feeling confined. Let's say I want to add 2 inches at the fullest part of my bicep. If I pull this straight out, so I have an extra 2 inches there, I have an extremely wide sleeve down here. So you can see, yeah, that means down here at the bottom, I'm adding about 5 inches in width, which is fine, which is doable. The other option is to make a slice across here and kind of bring it down so that it's not that extreme. And decision time, I think I'm going to do that. This is just a very wide sleeve to have into one little cuff. So yeah, I think I'm going to. So what that means is with the bicep lined up here, let me move it back on straight of grain here. Okay, so straight of grain is lined up on my grid. I'm going to take my ruler at the fullest part of the bicep here, move it up and just above it. Okay, I'm just going to draw a line straight across here. I'm actually just a little bit above it, you know, I'm in the neighborhood. And I'm going to cut to about 5/8 of an inch from my cutting line for my size. Turn this over here. And again, I'm going to need to get a piece of scrap paper to put underneath here. So let me go cut a piece and I'll be right back. All right, so I have my sleeve piece here. I've got a little scrap of tissue paper behind it. And what I want to do first is get my center dot on my grid. I'm just going to place a little weight on it there. Put this paper back as it was in the beginning and make sure the bottom is also straight on grain here according to my grid below it. Okay, now if up here I want it to be 2 inches wider right here, I'm going to move this piece over so I have 1 inch there, and this piece over so I have 1 inch here. All right. Okay, so right about there looks pretty good. I'm going to actually move it just a hair more. Okay, up here at the top, I'm going to have to push it down so that I have a little bit of a wrinkle there, but that's okay. Put another weight there just to hold it. Now, down below, I got all this extra room, so I am lifting the bottom part. Remember, I spliced it, and I am overlapping the bottom part over the top part. And up here, if I added 2 inches, I'm going to try to only add like 3 inches on the bottom, okay? So if this is my dead center, I'm going to put this 1.5 inches out. I'm just going to put a piece of tape here. Okay, so the edge of this is 1.5 inches from my center line. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Overlap the bottom piece and place this one so it is also 1.5 inches or so out from the center. Okay, you see, this is the center line that I keep talking about here. All right, so now I'm just going to draw a cutting line this way. So that way it's not as bell. Since I added more up here, yeah, I'm adding more down there, but I think it's going to be fine. You know, it's a sleeve. You can do however you want. And now that I have it kind of placed where I want, I'm going to stick a piece of tape here to hold those 2 layers together. Piece of tape here to hold those. This down here. This right here. And this here. And then the last thing is a little piece of tape here to hold where it goes. All right. So now I have my sleeve. Now I have my sleeve piece all modified. My cutting line as it's printed, you know, with the exception of this little piece that I added, is the same cutting line I'm using on the outside edge. And I can feel comfortable that I'm going to have plenty of room to move around with this piece. And I think that is it for right now. So let me go ahead and get my fabric put down, get these pieces cut out, and we're going to start putting it together. My microphone is overcharging on the stand, but I just wanted to show you what I'm basically doing down here at the bottom of both skirt pieces. Just putting my ruler at 6 inches, continuing this line all the way down. So I have a little cutting line there, and then just making a few marks across the bottom at 6 inches so I can kind of maintain this curve like so, okay? And then just cutting it there. So that's how I am lengthening my skirt. Okay, welcome to the next day here, and I am going to start working on my bodice front. And looking at the front of the envelope, I was thinking, where is my envelope? I was thinking that this contrast here was kind of like where they put the facing on the outside, but it's actually supposed to be a lace trim. Doesn't really look like lace trim, but I guess it's open to interpretation. And so when I opened up my instructions, I saw that and I was thinking, well, my goodness, I have a boatload of lace. So I've actually pulled out a piece that I have that's like a little piece of lace over a little piece of satin ribbon, you know. And it used to be gathered, I ungathered it, but that way it's going to show up. So I am going to go ahead and put that on there, you know, just for fun. But before I do that, the instructions do not say to stay stitch this, but this front part here is cut on a bias, and I want to make sure that is not going to stretch out of shape while I'm working on it. So what I'm going to do is get a piece of stay tape of some sort and fuse that on before I put my lace on. So on the wrong side of my fabric, along this edge here, I'm going to fuse my stay tape. Let me go grab that. There are all different brands. This is my favorite. I don't even know which way the camera is pointing at this point, but it's just a woven stay tape. I think I have a link, or I bought it off, I think I bought it off eBay, but it is the 𝐃𝐨𝐬, and it is a woven, fusible woven stay tape, okay, and I usually try to overlay the part where the seam allowance will be. So I just cut off a little piece here, and this takes the place of stay stitching. It does not add any bulk, you know, which is nice. So just placing my tape on there. Oh, I need to turn on my iron. When my iron is turned on, what I'll do is just with steam, press it on, move the iron, press it on, okay? And that's going to fuse that in place. Once this stay tape is fused on, I'm going to go ahead and serge all around the outside edges before I put my lace on. And I had a question in my comments, why do I do that? And I think I've addressed this before, but in case you're new, I like to serge just barely going around the edges, not really cutting off fabric, just to keep it from fraying. And then I can press seams open, I can do all kinds of things like that. If you sew the seam and then you serge both of those together, you can't press those seams open. And if you wanted to sew the seam and then serge them independently, well, that's just a whole lot of headache I don't want to deal with. So that's why I do it. Let me wait for my iron and then we'll press that on. So at this point, this is what my bodice piece looks like from the outside. You know, I got my edges serged, got my stay tape fused on. And to place my trim, what I need to do is I'm going to be using a 5/8 inch seam allowance right here when I sew the facing on. And I need my edge of my lace to overlap that by 1/8 of an inch. So what that means to me is if this is going to be a 5/8 inch seam allowance, I need a 1/2 inch stitching line when I put my lace on. So I'm just putting my ruler on here at a 1/2 inch seam allowance and drawing a line on with my heat erasable pen, which will erase completely, so no problem there. Get you closer here, see if you can even see, like right here you might be able to see where I have that line drawn across, okay? So I am going to take my lace, and like I said, it's like a satin ribbon that has a piece of lace on top, and it's not really attached, barely. So when I put it on, the stitching line is going to help me hold it on. If this right here at that edge, when I line that edge up there at 1/2 inch, that's going to mean that when I do my final seam, it's going to go right here, and that's going to lock it in, okay? So I'm going to carefully pin that on like this, and then do a seam straight across here just to hold it on temporarily. So I'm just putting several pins going straight across here. Now, because my trim, it's 2-layered, I have decided that what I'm going to do is run a couple rows of stitching with white thread. The first one is going to be at the 5/8 inch mark, so it's going to be stitching line like right about here on my lace, okay, all the way up. Then I'm also going to come on the outside, like right about here. I might even do a little bitty zigzag along the edge. I think that's what I'm going to do. But I'm going to lock in the outside edge of my satin ribbon. But I'm going to let my little lace be free. You know, it's just little polyester lace, so it's not going to shrink or anything. So I'm going to go to my machine, put some white thread on, and run those 2 lines of stitching. All right, I am going to be using Frida, my free number 5 treadle machine. I think she's from around the 1910 era, I'm thinking. I don't remember offhand, but I've got her loaded up with white thread. So the first row of stitching, what I'm going to do, because it's not critical that it's at exactly 5/8, but I want to make sure I catch the edge of my lace. So I'm just going to be watching it from the right side and travel straight down the edge of my lace. I don't know why that's curling up that way. There we go. If you've never used a treadle, it's very easy once you figure out the rhythm, you know. You just get a certain rhythm in your feet and make sure that the wheel is always turning the way it's supposed to. And this one and most of them, it's towards you. Okay, so now that I've gotten down to the bottom, I am just going to lift it up, go across the bottom edge, and then back up this side. And because she's a straight stitch machine, I know I had mentioned that, oh, I'll probably just zigzag it. So obviously that's not going to happen. So we're just going to run a straight stitch along the edge here, all the way back up. I don't know if you can see the little row of stitching up there at the top. That's going to hold it on nicely. I'm going to go ahead and finish this one and the other front piece. Then I'm going to go ahead and iron it so I can erase my little marks. And we will continue. So at this point, I've got my little lace stitched on there. Row of stitching here, row of stitching there. Is the stay tape kind of redundant? Yes, but if you were not putting the lace on, you would definitely need it. And if anything, it helped the edge to be nice and secure while I was putting my lace on. So I would do it again. But what I need to do before I get rid of this front piece here is I've got a lot of markings that I'm going to transfer over. So here is a little circle that is for sleeve placement. I've got a notch up here, a notch down there, but also this little center front circle. I'm going to punch that out also. So the way that I transfer my markings, I'm going to flip this over to the wrong side, put my pattern up here on top, draw in with my heat erasable pen where the circles are, and I do that after I iron because, you know, when I iron it first, they disappear. Okay, so you can see it pretty clearly right there. For the notches, I'm just going to clip them. This is a fairly unravel-ish kind of a fabric, but I think it's okay. It'll be fine. I'm just going to clip in about 1/4 inch, just about the depth of the printed notch on the pattern, and I think that that's going to be fine. Another one here, here, and here. Get that marked on both of them, and then we're going to get the bodice back piece. All right, so I've got my back piece here, and no real manipulation to do on it before we sew it together. So while it is here, I'm going to go ahead and clip before I serge this time. But I can still kind of find my clips through my serging, so, you know, they're not totally lost on me. I know where to look. So I'm going to clip my notches. There is a circle up here for sleeve placement. Put the leather under the tissue paper on top of the fabric so that, you know, you don't put a hole in your fabrics. That's terrible. Punch that out, draw in my circle, draw that on both sides, and then I'm gonna serge all the way around just this piece. So at this point, I've got my back piece serged all the way around. Set this little pattern piece aside here, and it's time to sew the shoulder seams up here. So I'm just going to match up the shoulders, match up that little notch I just clipped across the top, sew it at 5/8 of an inch, and then press that seam allowance open. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to work on is my facings, back and front facing. Back is cut on a fold, and I need to interface them. So of course, you guessed it, I am using my favorite super lightweight interfacing. I'm going to go ahead and get that fused to these pieces. Got distracted by my new book here that I found at a secondhand store. And I just wanted to show you something. I just opened this and glanced at it, and it's a pattern fit book from, what is this from? But this is the name of it. It says Fantastic Fit for Everybody. But one of the things that I just opened it up and, flipped through and saw is she has this idea, creating a croquis of your own body, which is actually a pretty cool idea. Let me get my sketchbook. A lot of times I use this, it's just a fashion sketchbook, but they have these little, bodies on it. I don't know if you can see, they're drawn on very lightly, that then you can put your own sketches over. Okay, these are croquis, and they are very stylized. I mean, look at those, are like Barbie doll, super tall legs and everything. This is fashion model body. But what she is hinting at in here, well, she's not hinting, there's chapters on it, is to create one of your own shape, so that then you can draw the garment that you're thinking of getting onto your exact body outline and seeing how it will fit before you go to all the effort. And it's a fabulous little idea, so I just want to show you really quick. She has you where you put on like a dark leotard, stand against a white background, take a photo, sketch around it, so that you have an actual outline of your body. I think she has you do like front and back and profile. And then that way you can draw this type of a drawing onto your actual body and see how it's going to fit. So I just thought I'd share that while I'm glancing at this book. It's a cool idea. Anyhow, putting that aside, let me go ahead and get my facing put together here. Alrighty, so the next part is we are going to sew these together at the shoulder straps, or at the shoulders. So here is my back piece. I'm going to put it right side up. I have not finished the edge yet. I'm going to finish the edge after I sew these pieces together. Down here, one side has a little diagonal chunk taken out. That is the shoulder seam. This point down here that seems to come more pointy and it has a little dot, that is down below. Okay, so this is the shoulder up here, and that is what's going to get matched up. Now before I actually pin these together, I am going to mark this center dot here down below on the wrong side of my front facings. That's going to help make sure that I put my front pieces on the correct way. Okay, so I know that this center dot has to be in the center, right? So this is going to go on this side and this is going to go on that side. So they're both in the center. After I sewed it, pressed this seam allowance open, I am edge finishing the outside edge of the entire facing here. And I'm doing it the way the instructions say, amazingly enough, which is turning under this edge just a little bit. I would say a scant 1/4 inch, and then just doing a straight stitch down the edge, just to hold that in. Get to the end, and to back it up, I lift up the presser foot and go over that spot. Okay, so now I have my edge, outside edge of my entire facing finished off at the same time. All right, so I am pinning my facing onto the top part of my bodice here, and I need to stitch this on at 5/8 of an inch. So that means going through the dots, starting at the edge, coming all the way through. You can see oven burn yesterday, those things happen. So anyway, I'm just going to be coming up this way, all the way around at 5/8. Because I put my lace on, though, I am going to look at this side, the wrong side, when I'm stitching. And that way I will be able to follow along this stitching line that is the first inside line when I was sewing my lace on. So I'm just going to overshoot this one, just barely. Get my pin here and put my stitching right here. Okay, so just on that side of it. And that way I know I'm going to get my stitching placed correctly as far as my lace is concerned. Okay, so the instructions want you to, after you sew it, understitch it, which I'm going to, but before I do that, I'm going to trim out a lot of the seam allowance here so that everything's going to flex a lot better. So I'm going to use pinking shears and come in here and trim off about half of the seam allowance going up the straight of the front. And most of the curve is going to be right here when we come into this back neck area. So I might get just a hair closer than halfway. We'll see here. All the way around. Okay, so now my seam allowance looks like this, which is going to flex a whole lot better. Okay, so now looking at it this way, when I open up my facing, I want my seam allowance to be underneath the facing side, okay, folding it this way. And my understitching is going to be a line of stitching that is going to be on the facing side right about here, you know, just barely inside of it, but on top of the little bit of pinked seam allowance back there, okay? It is going to be the same, coming up all the way around the back, just folding it up as you go and making that stitching line right there all the way around. Alrighty, I've got it stitched. Here is my understitching here, okay? And I've pressed that edge and just got it laying here. Like I said, I did not sew this outside edge of this lace here, just of the ribbon underneath. I'm hoping that was a good call at this point. I'm not too sure. I'm always questioning my life choices midway through a project. But I need to tack some stuff down. So down here at the bottom, where the facing piece is, I need to baste it across here, and I'm going to do this on the machine, just straight across here at about 1/4 inch, just to hold this facing flat against the bottom edge here so that it will stay put. And then also up at the shoulders, I stuck a pin here while I was ironing it. And what the instructions want you to do is with the needle and thread, baste this to the facing. Yeah, I'm going to do that. I was going to do a stitch in the ditch thing, but you know what, with this pattern, as busy as it is, if I use a white thread, there's a chance it might show up here. If I use a blue thread, there's a chance it might show up there. So I am going to do that. Just go through the seam allowance only and tack that to the facing. Alrighty, so I've got my little, well, you can't really see them, which is the point here, where that's sewn on by hand, down here at the bottom, stitch to keep that closed. Now with right sides together, I am going to match up my side seams here so that at 5/8 inch and press the seam allowance open on both sides. Alrighty, so I've got seam allowance is pressed open. Now I need to connect the front where the dot was. Remember there was a dot right here? Well, it's on the inside, plus I've sewn over it and ironed it to erase it. So I'm just going to draw it again. That dot is 5/8 inch from the bottom. So I'm just putting a little mark there on that side, and over here a little mark there at that side. So I need to match up those two dots, one on top of the other, and that's going to overlap a little bit down here. That's what I want. Actually, I'm not going to pin that. I'm just going to get a needle and thread and do a few little whip stitches down here just to hold that crossed over where it is. Okay, so at this point I have it stitched right below that dot down, and that's going to keep these two pieces together here. as I work on the next part. Now the instructions say put this piece away for a minute and that you need to work on the sleeves. So I just want to take a peek. We have some gathers up here at the top of the sleeve head, but the sleeve, if you remember, is really, really wide. And there is a band down here at the bottom, but they want you to sew the sleeve into the cylinder, gather it, and put it in the band. And from my past experience, I have decided that for a sleeve that is going to be that wide, gathered into a band that small, that it's easier for me to do it while it is still flat. So what I'm going to do is go get my sleeve pieces and serge around the outside edges. Put in my gathering stitches at the top, okay, one at just under 5/8, one a little bit in from there, between the two dots. And then down at the bottom, I'm not doing this step yet. I'm just going to go ahead and sew the gathering stitches on the bottom from where the seam allowance starts here at 5/8 of an inch. I'll probably start my gathering stitches at about 3/4 inch and go all the way across, again, 2 rows, one at just under 5/8 and one a little bit in from there. So let me go get that done and then we'll come back and work on gathering it in. I've got my little sleeve band here, my big sleeve, and before I actually do a whole lot of stuff, I want to mark which side of my sleeve is the back. The side that has 2 notches is the back side, okay? So on this back corner here, I put a letter B with a circle around it, which is my cheat sheet that says this is the back of the sleeve, okay? So with that, I'm going to use my regular hole punch and everything to punch out the circles, do the notches, and do the serging and the gathering, and then I'll be back. Okay, welcome. It has been a few days and I am back up here I have a couple hours. You know, a lot of my sewing, I just kind of fit it in where I can, and this is one of those days. So this is the bottom of one of my sleeves, and you can see I do have my rows of gathering threads in. And I'm gonna pull off one of these sleeve binding pieces, which are cut on a bias. So they will have a bit of stretch to them, which is interesting. That should make it comfortable, I suppose. So what I'm gonna do is just find the point where I am in the center of my band, okay? And I left the cap off of my pen last night. So let's see here. If I can just draw a line where the center is there, and then fold this in half and draw the line where the center is here. If I can do this without losing my place. Doesn't show up very well there, but trust me, it's there. And I'm going to match up that center first. And this will be, you know, another 5/8 inch seam allowance stitch. So when we're all done, this band's going to be very, very narrow. Okay, it's just going to be barely showing out there. Then pulling this over, and you can see I didn't put gathering stitches in the seam allowance area, just in the outer area. So I can go ahead and pin this over here, and the same with the other side, and then just get started pulling and gathering and getting everything matched up. I'm actually going to go ahead and match up one other spot. So at the halfway point here in both my band and my sleeve, I'm going to pin that just to, you know, make it easier to keep everything even on both sides. And that way on my band, I have a pin, you know, about every 3 inches or so. And that's going to make it pretty uniform when I pull all of these gathering stitches. Alrighty, so now that I have them all pulled up and gathered, I am just going to tie off these gathering threads at the ends and cut them off because they annoy me. It looks like my scissors are getting dull too. Once I get them both tied off, I'm going to go over to my lovely free machine and stitch this at 5/8 of an inch across here. Okay, so I have my band sewed on at 5/8 inch. All right, so if I pull it this way, you can see that seam allowance is taking up a huge amount of space in there. So before I do anything else, I am going to come back with pinking shears and take off about half of that seam allowance in there, because we just don't need that kind of trouble in our lives right now. Okay, now because we are doing it differently than the instructions, you know, which wanted you to do all this as a circle, if I close this up first and then sew my sleeve together, you know, that will work. I'm just going to have a little visible seam allowance down here. What I've chosen to do, however, is to match up the seam down here with my little edges of my band still exposed. So making sure that this seam matches up on both sides. And up here, I'm going to go ahead and sew this seam here first and then turn up the bottom edge of the band. I think that'll look a lot neater. So I'm just going to slide my little sleeve roll in here so that I can press my seam allowances open without getting everything else 𝐥𝐤𝐤'd. And I have a letter B over here marking the back side. I have to reach over for my pen, and I know when I iron that B is going to disappear, so I'm just going to put another one a little further up, because keeping track of that will make my life a lot easier in just a few minutes. So now with my sleeve roll inside, I can just open that up, put a little steam on it, press it open nice and flat all the way to the bottom. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and turn my little band under, but before I do that, I'm going to clip out some of this seam allowance right like that so that it's not quite as bulky. And getting it started, just turning under the edge, and I want my folded edge to come just at that point where the seams are meeting. I am going to use some clips here because this is a very thick little spot and I don't want it to come open. Okay, so I got one of my little clips on there. So then I'm going to come all the way to the opposite side and get that one folded under about 1/4 inch and then up so that I'm matching up at the seam line. Throw a clip there, and then I should be able to do one more here and everything else will fall into place. So I have basically 4 clips on there. That's going to be good, you know. And so you can see it's just a tiny little like 1/4 inch band that's exposed on the outside, which is nice. And since it is cut on a bias, it does have a little bit of flex there. So I could machine stitch this, but I don't think I'm going to. I don't think that that would be the best for me. I'm just going to go ahead and get a needle and thread and whip stitch it on the inside so it's invisible, you know, tuck everything in nicely. I'm going to do that for both of my little bottoms of both of my sleeves. Okay, so it's time to go ahead and attach my sleeve to my bodice. So this is my front of my bodice, this is the back, here is my side seam. I'm going to match up the side seam of my sleeve to that of my bodice down here, and make sure that the back, your sleeve that has the B for the letter B for the word back, is attached to the back part of your bodice. So first I'm just going to pin this, pinning both sides of the seam so I can anchor those seam allowances down because I don't want them to get bent out of shape. Okay, now I'm going to skip up to the top, and I've got a center dot on my sleeve, and that is going to match up with the top of my shoulder seam here. Right sides together with my shoulder seam at the top. Okay, I've got my gathering threads up there. Gonna go ahead and pin that. And where the gathering threads started on my sleeve, matches up to where the dot is, because we started our gathering threads at a dot, okay? That's going to match up with the dot on the bodice. And there's not a huge amount of gathering up here on the shoulder, just a little bit. There might be 1 or 2 little puckers, you know, but it's not a huge amount. So down here at the bottom, there is a notch and notch to match up, but it fits together pretty well. So I'm just going to finish pinning all of this together and then pull the gathering threads up at the very top of the sleeve cap, just so it is nice and smooth. Okay, I've got it pinned all the way around, and I have already sewed the other sleeve on, so let me show you how I'm going to do this. I start stitching where the notch is, over on the side, you know, whichever side is convenient. This is the back side here. So I start there at 5/8 of an inch, go all the way around. You can see there's just a little bit of gathering pucker, not a huge amount up there, okay? When I get to the point where I started, I'm bumping it in about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going again at the bottom part over here to where my other notch is on the opposite side, okay? And then I'm stopping. So I have a double reinforcement row along this whole bottom curve of the sleeve, because if anything's going to break, that's the point. And then I come back, and in that same area, I'm just clipping a couple notches on each side, about 1/4 inch deep, just to give that sleeve a little more flexibility, okay? So when I open it up, this is what it's going to look like. I got a gathering thread exposed, but that's not a big deal there. I've got maybe 1 or 2 little slight puckers from all the gathering, but not much. If I really wanted to work on this, I could probably work it in as a sleeve cap that had absolutely none, but I don't think that's necessary on this dress. So I'm going to go ahead and sew in the other sleeve just like this. So this is the top at this point, and I wanted to pop it onto my dress form so you can see what I was talking about this very low plungy neckline. Now, I'm more chesty than the standard pattern calls for, so if you want to picture this even lower, you know, falling even lower, that could be an issue. What I'm going to do, just because I am the type, and this is a pretty low neckline that I have on here too, this tulipy sleeve blouse from last year, but I don't want to have to be constantly hanging on to my chest or something when I'm bending over or working or something. That's just not comfortable to me, you know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, and just using a little scrap here of fabric to show you, I'm going to be creating a little panel, and I'm going to be permanently stitching it on. That's just going to come across like that. I know it changes the overall design of the original dress, but to me, it's just going to be a lot more comfortable. I want to make sure I still have enough room in this opening up here to be able to pull it over my head and to have the flex I need to be able to, you know, get it up over my shoulders and everything. So if this is the fullest part of my bust, I'm going to say, if I have it so that it is up maybe about 4 inches, you know what, let me get a ruler so I can actually see what that is. Okay, so if from this bottom center point, I measure up to where I have it right now, that is from the cut edge about 4 inches. From the cut edge up here is where I am putting this. Okay, you know, that doesn't look half bad. I'm just gonna pin this in place, stitch it on by hand. I'll show you how, and finish it off, because I think that that's going to be a simple solution, all taken care of, and then we can move on to the next step. So let me pin my little, what do they call it, like a Modesty panel or something, in place, and then we'll flip it down to the table. All right, so I want to show you what I did. I just took it straight off my dress form, went over to the machine, and on the outside of my ribbon, remember I stitched it down by machine, I just went over that same line of stitching and put straight stitch, I don't even know if you can see, down, over, and up. Now this is just, you know, a double layer of stuff out here just to make my life easy, what I'm going to do is come back and trim it about a 1/2 inch away from my stitching line. And then very carefully, I will go over to my serger and just, folding this little bit out, run that edge with my serger just to get it overcast. And so it won't fray when I wash this. And then we'll move forward. So let me just trim this off the bottom. So on the outside, the right side, it's going to look like this. This is kind of free, which is fine with me, but it's going to be permanently attached right here. Alrighty, so there you go. My edges are serged, and I'm just going to set this piece aside for a minute and get my skirt front and back pieces and my pocket over here. Okay, so now remember, I'm doing this version where it's not, multiple ruffled layers, but I extended it because this version is a shorter length. I wanted it longer. So I'm going to end up hopefully with a dress a little bit shorter on me, probably about like that, but only one layer. So we have these pockets. They're not huge, there it is on my hand, but it's doable. Don't worry about that. It doesn't hurt. It's just a burn. What I need to do is serge around my pieces. So I'm just going to deal with my front piece first. I'm going to pull the pattern paper off, go over to my serger and serge around the edges, and I'll be right back. Oh, while I'm over there, you know what? I'm going to take my pattern of my pockets, and there should be 4 of them, and I'm going to go ahead and serge around each one of my pocket pieces also. Alrighty, so I'm going to mark a few things first on my pocket pieces. I am going to mark where my little dots are. Okay, there's a lower one at the 5/8 inch point from each side, and an upper one at the 5/8 inch mark from each side. Okay, I also have a notch here. I'm just going to go ahead and draw a line there to make it easy to see. On my skirt, and this is my skirt front, I'm looking at the right side here. Okay, now you can see that the pocket dots are not way up here. It's going to be set lower, but this is pretty high up on your side, so that works. I need to use my little white pencil because I'm putting a dot over a dark spot. And those little dots are going to get lost pretty darn fast, so I'm going to stick a little pin over them for right now, just so I don't lose them. Okay, and there is a notch in the middle too, but I'm primarily going to be using the dots on this pattern to match up. So what I need to do is get a pocket piece, and this is actually the wrong one because I need to get them right sides together. So this is the right pocket to go on here. And yes, I don't have dots drawn on here, but I have my pins exposed. And remember, my dots are just a seam allowance in. So 5/8 inch from each side is where I need to center this pocket. So I'm going to be a rebel and just go ahead and pin it on like that. Now this should be stitched on at a smaller seam allowance. Let me see what it says. Yes, it does. Okay. I need to sew right along here at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, so about a 1/4 inch narrower than the standard on everything else. And I'm going to match up my pocket and stitch that on the other side of my front. And my back pieces for my skirt is very, very similar. Okay, so both the front and the back is just one big skirt piece cut on a fold, okay? So on my back piece, I will also be serging all the way around this piece. And again, it's the same thing where the dots for the pocket are set lower. So we'll pretend this is the right side of the back pocket, okay? It's the same thing where I will be matching up a pocket, matching the dots. I want to transfer them over here, which are at 5/8 of an inch in, okay? Matching up those along the side, stitching at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, okay? But before I do that, I will be serging all the way around this back piece. So next time you see, ooh, I hate this time of year. These little bugs, they come out of nowhere. I'm gonna go take him outside and I'll be back. Okay, so in the instructions, they're going to want you to run gathering stitches after you sew the side seams together. Just to make my life easier, I'm going to go ahead and run my gathering stitches along the top edge of both my back skirt and my front skirt. The same 2 rows of stitches. So the way I do it in general is, here's my serged edge. I run my first row of stitching using the serged edge here against my presser foot as my guide, which puts my next row of stitching about 1/8 of an inch in, and then use that as the guide for the next one. Okay, so I have my 2 rows of gathering stitches in here so that my furthest one out is at about 1/2 inch or so. I'm going to do that across the top of my back and the front. Now the front comes up in a peak like this, okay, and you run it in 2 different sections. So from the side, let's see, maybe you can see on here. So on this side up to this point, and then stop and leave your tails and do a second row, and then from this point down, you know, so you have tails up here for both of those sets of gathering stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in with a longer basting kind of stitch on my machine, and I will be back. I was just about to get started with my front here, and I wanted to show you, this is my pocket, this is the edge on the outside, and it comes up to a little point here. And just because I want to be precise, I'm going to try to center this point in the center of one and put the outside edges so that they are on the corners down here, okay? That should give me a pretty good, get that centered down there again, okay. That should give me a pretty good, you know, straight of grain kind of thing here. And this is just so that I can get my gathering threads correct, so that I can then, using my ruler, draw a little line. And I don't know if you can see it, but I have a little chalk mark right there. So that's going to give me the point where on this side I'll stop my threads maybe about 1/4 inch away from it, and the same thing, I'll start my threads about 1/4 inch away from it on this side. Okay, so that's how I am doing my center of my front. All right, so now that I have my gathering stitches in, what I'm going to do is just match up my side seams here. Now at this point, what I have done is pressed each side individually so that my pocket is overlapping the seam allowance here. So the seam above and below the pocket on both sides, the front and the back, is going out, and the pocket is just kind of coming over it. And I pressed it so my pocket is flat, okay? So at this point, I can match up my pins over here, where this is up here, come down here, match up the bottom of my pockets, and all the way down below to the bottom of my skirt. I'm going to stick a little pin here. If you remember, our dot, well, I erased it when I ironed, so let me grab a pattern piece here so I can put it back on. So the dot is right about here for the top and down here for the bottom, okay? And those are at 5/8 of an inch or so from the edge. So what I'm going to do first is this seam up here, you know, from the top to that point, all right? Then at this point, turning and coming into the pocket, I want my seam allowances to be pointed towards the pocket. So I'm going to come here, go down, around, and I'm coming back up here, and I'm going to aim at this dot right there. Okay, again, going over the seam allowances here. Once I get to this point, leave my needle down, pivot, and head down at 5/8 of an inch the rest of the way down, okay? So here, all the way around to back out to this dot, and then straight down. I'm going to do that for both of my side seams. Ready, so I've got my side seam done. Now I want to press this so that the pocket goes towards the front. And this is my front up here. You can tell because all of the gathering threads that end halfway. All right, so the way I'm going to do this is this top part above the pocket is going to get pressed open, but you have to make a clip just in the back seam allowance above that pocket, and I am only clipping down to a fat 1/8 of an inch from the stitching line. I don't want to cut all the way up to that stitching line because, you know, then there's a chance that things are going to break through the stitching line, and we just don't need to worry about that. So from the outside, you know, you don't see anything. Now below the pocket, it's nice and flat here. Again, this is the front. I am also going to clip the back seam allowance only just below the pocket, again to, got my scissors caught there, a fat 1/8 of an inch away from the stitching line, and press the seam allowance open below the pocket. Okay, and just flat over where the pocket is. So on the right side, what you should be seeing is something that looks like this, where the place where the pocket is in a direct line with the seam, okay? But when you open the pocket, there's a space, this is like about a 1/4 inch between the fold that I just pressed and where the pocket is sewn on. That's the difference in the seam allowances that we sewed for the two things. For the pocket and then for the attachment to the front to the back. So it just looks like a clean line going straight down. I'm going to go ahead and press the other side just like this. Alright, so at this point now I am going to be attaching my skirt to my bodice. I just have my skirt right side out. I got my front on top here and pushing it together. I'm going to put my bodice, I'm going to put my bodice inside out. I'm going to pull these sleeves down out of the way and slip my skirt inside of it. Okay, and I'm going to match up this center front place first. All these little threads straight up at the point right here. You can kind of see it on my stitching line. At that point, I want to make sure that that lines up with the tall point of my skirt front center piece. Okay, got lots of thickness going on there, like that. All right. Then I'm going to do my side seams, and then once I have my side seams matched up, there is a notch about halfway, and I'm going to go back and match up that notch, which is right around here. Okay, and then just take my time pulling my gathering threads till I get it all gathered up and nicely pinned to my bodice front and back and everything to my bodice. Alright, I've got it sewed on, and I wanted to point out a couple things. First, when you're sewing a long gathered piece, it's a lot easier in my opinion to put the gather side up and the flat side down on the machine, and that way you can go ahead and sort out your gathers as you go. You'll be less likely to get something that looks like that, you know, catching the wrong thing under your stitches. But once I got all the way done, I realized that I did not have the exact place matched up in the center front. What I want to show you is this. Remember, I whip stitched down below that opening? I want my seam line to come up to this point, which looks like about 3/8 of an inch above the stitching line that I currently have. Okay, so if I look at it this way, I can kind of feel where that is, where that little divot is. I'm just going to go ahead and put a big dot right there. And I am going to get this flattened out, re-stitch this stitching line right here to come up from where it is here. I'm just going to redo just like this center 8 inches here to angle up to hit this dot and then come back down to hit down here. You know, it's probably not the exact way that they meant. I probably should have shifted this whole skirt piece up to match that center dot. I just didn't do it. If you look on the skirt piece, there is a dot here, which I did not punch out, and that is my downfall. So if you do this, what you should do is make sure you transfer that dot over, which is going to be right about 5/8 of an inch down. So it's going to be right about there, but that's going to help you make sure that you position that dot over the dot or over the point where those two front pieces cross. You know, c'est la vie, these things happen. I'm just going to go ahead and make this seam line here to cover up that spot, let it match, and it'll look okay from the front. So this is my dress from the outside. Now I need to press this area here, and they want your seam allowance to go down towards the skirt. So if I open this up, when I am pressing this, they're going to want all of this seam allowance up here at the bodice to be folded down and pressed that way. I'm going to go ahead and press that, and at the same time I'm at the ironing board for that. I'm going to go ahead and turn up my skirt hem. Now let's see here. What kind of a hem did they ask for? A 5/8 inch hem, so just a little narrow hem. We can do that. We can do that. So while I am pressing the seam allowance for the bodice down, and I'll do that with my dress inside out, I'm going to press up about 5/8 inch on the bottom all the way around. Okay, so she is all done now. I wanted to point out again that the way that I did this, it's not exactly the way the instructions said because I didn't match up that dot, but I get the same point across, and I do think that it looks really nice, you know. No problem there. I am glad at this point that I have my little Modesty panel in. I haven't tried it on yet, but we'll see how it looks. Also on the hem, I pressed it up that 5/8 of an inch, and then I looked at the instructions and they said turn it under and make a narrow hem. So that's what I did. I have a hem that's probably close to about 3/8 of an inch there, all the way around. You can see I just machine stitched it with my little free machine, and she's ready to go. Okay, pull off my glasses here. Got it done. It's a very comfortable little dress. The pockets are handy, you know, love those. The dogs are barking, love them. My thoughts. If I had not put this little panel in here, I think it would have been too low. Just saying, you know, everyone has different comfort levels. My comfort level said put the little panel in, and you can see it didn't take much to do that. But I like it. It's not super full, you know, so it's not like there's a huge amount of fabric gathered up here to make it really bulky, but it's enough that I have plenty of room to move around, and it's nowhere near being a cling to you kind of dress, so that's good. It's becoming fall. I came out this afternoon, so you can see the leaves are starting to turn. In the next week or so, they should do their full color, so hopefully I'll get some more pictures for you. But anyway, I just wanted to show it to you. I think it's a cute dress, very comfortable, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful lighthouses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.